You mentioned how you started out in social work, but you always felt like you wanted to be in like a managerial leadership role. When it comes to leadership, how would you define a leader? And what are some qualities that you think every good and effective leader should have?
Well, I think it does start with a couple things that are really necessary, which is embracing future. There has to be a real sense of where we're going. Right now, I understand that when you're in a line supervisor position, you're not the one necessarily defining the future. Someone else might be defining the future for you because there's a different level of leadership that's probably doing some of that work. But I do think it's important for people to be thinking in terms of vision and direction and where we're trying to go. If you're always focused on just today and not what we're going to be doing 6 to 12 months from now, if you're not mixing that in, a dose of that, then everything becomes transactional. And then it's very easy to believe that this is my job, these 10 things that are on this to-do list are my job, and that the job isn't bigger than that the job isn't about getting us from here to there. And then that translates to everything else we're doing in terms of our work, because that translates into how we interpret our work with the kids and families or whoever we work with, right? I think future orientation is really critical for leadership. And I'm going to use a couple words that are in, we happen to use a model here at CCTC called the self model, which is part of the sanctuary model. And you've probably seen that on our material. But another word in there that I think is really important is safety. And it's about how does a leader create a sense of safety? And safety is about psychological safety, social safety, emotional safety, not just physical safety, which is where people often try to go. Certain kinds of jobs, you're not going to completely prevent physical safety, right? So it's how do you create an environment where people can manage, can support for those difficult moments that happen, so that someone has the ability to come and sit down with you when they feel safe to talk to you about that they don't feel safe in a particular situation, or that they're having an emotional reaction, or that they're being triggered by what they're experiencing. So I think leaders need to be able to embrace the concept that people need to feel safe in the work that they're doing. And they need to feel safe in the teams that they're part of. And that comes out in a lot of different ways, right? But it's your ability to say what you think, to give your opinion, to feel safe, to contribute to a decision that's coming up, and not simply wait to be told what to do. You want to create that kind of environment, because then the whole becomes greater than some of the parts as different people begin to contribute to the decisions, all within a very purposeful direction that you're headed in. But that everybody gives opinions about how you can get to that point, contributes to that work. And I think it's a fine balance between that and structure, because it's also a leader's job to make sure the structure is in place, right? So you can't let things go off chaotically. The leader has to make sure that, guys, here it's still the 10 things that need to get done every day, and has to be able to be firm about that stuff while inspiring folks about the other stuff, the future and the other work. So I think that balance is always one of the biggest challenges. I know new supervisors, that's their biggest challenge, is how to create that balance where you're holding people accountable, where you're being firm about certain things, practical things that have to happen every day, but at the same time trying to inspire people by being oriented towards the purpose that we're trying to achieve, the long-term purposes that we're trying to achieve. What are the goals? Because the goals are what are going to get people excited. People aren't excited about what they have to do today. You have to get people excited about these goals. So I think a good leader knows how to make sure that while they're taking care of this practical stuff, they're creating that vision, they're supporting the vision and direction that we're headed in the future, and all that. So it requires engagement. It requires creating a sense of safety so that people are actively participating in the decisions that are being made as the group. And that's the way you get to the whole being greater than the sum of the parts, not necessarily, that's why we have, this is another subject for another day, but why there's challenges with the hybrid, not with the hybrid work, but with the virtual work, with the straight virtual work, because over time, those teams don't really know each other anymore. Now, right now, we're all doing okay because most of us work with the people that we're working with now prior to the pandemic. But over time, there's going to have to be some hybrid, because for those people who are still working virtually, because eventually you're going to be working on a team with 10 people and none of you have ever met in person. And so all the sort of social fabric that gets created on teams doesn't exist. So that's going to be a challenge. That's going to be the next challenge, is how do you create social fabric in environments that are highly virtual? But I think that's a separate subject. That's kind of like, I think, the next challenge, because successful teams need that social fabric.